Hello. So if you're watching this video, I presume you want to know how to backpack or you want a couple of tips. Um, Great, welcome. So I was backpacking for 14 days in Europe 2 weeks ago. And yeah, I have a lot of lessons that I've learned and a lot of resources that I want to share. Um, I think sort of like my context behind why I went backpacking in Europe. I'm studying abroad right now in the UK, and we have this Easter slash term break that is 6 weeks long. And so, because of that, a lot of people in my program, and myself included, are traveling. And it's a really nice way to kind of learn more about just Europe in general. But also, I think the other thing that sort of pushed me was I have other friends that are also studying abroad and they're in these other places. I have a friend in Paris, I have a friend in Copenhagen, I have a friend in Edinburgh, the list goes on. And so I felt like it was just a rare opportunity to be able to meet people along the way. I don't think I'll ever have a time in my life where I'll be able to sort of say that I have people in other cities that I can just conveniently meet up and just travel with. But anyways, when it comes to my route, I will sort of base everything off of the learnings that took place on my trip, but obviously I'll give a couple of introductory remarks for just resources and stuff as well. I was in Italy for 7 days, and then I was in Scandinavia for 7 days, and I was in Denmark and I was in Norway. And in Norway, we went all the way up to Tromsø, which is the very, very north. The northernmost McDonald's is in Tromsø. There's a lot of stuff going on up there. And I traveled with up to 6 people. And the way it worked was some of us would, converge at certain cities, but then also a couple of us would, go on our own itineraries because the trip was sort of like a free flowing, if I wanted to visit Italy, I would go to Italy. My other friends were maybe traveling somewhere else, and then we met up in Copenhagen, for example. And that was just super helpful just because, again, it works out that way. But yeah, I guess a few things to keep in mind when you're sort of traveling. The primary thing is it's always good to just display cultural understanding, whether that's just knowing basic words and phrases. Good morning, how are you? And just phrases like this can be super helpful. And then another thing, just have the local currency with you. I think, it's really easy to misplace your phone for a day, or, you lose something and you can't Apple Pay them or something. Just have that local currency at hand as well. It becomes super, super helpful as well. And then the third thing is a lot of countries it's okay to speak in English. I think there's sort of you feel pressured not to speak in English just because it might not be the primary language of communication. But if that's how you best express yourself, I think you should go ahead and speak in English. There's no harm. You'll find maybe another person who's an American or a British person just among the group of travelers you're with. But yeah, in terms of resources, I think the first two resources I want to give are Google Flights and Trainline. Google Flights has features that are super wonderful that can help you find really, really cheap flights. They have a price and date grid. And so you can find really cheap plane tickets, and you can optimize for the dates and times that are sort of the cheapest, which is super helpful if you're a student studying abroad with a budget. Same thing with Trainline. Trainline is sort of a website where you can find bus and train tickets, and it usually optimizes for the super saver train prices, or if you are someone with a rail card, which a rail card, by the way, in at least the UK is you pay a flat fee for this rail card, and your subsequent train ticket purchases are at 33% off. And so, all of these are integrated within Trainline, and you can get super cheap tickets. I've been able to score tickets as cheap as £8 to London and back to Oxford, which is where I'm currently at. And then in addition to Google Flights and Trainline, I would also say Hostel World is a really good resource, especially because you can get accommodations for up to as cheap as $20 per night. And these accommodations are really, really good. You can find people's reviews, and they have a wide assortment of places you can stay that are close to city center, which is super helpful. And there's options to say I want breakfast, or I want a place that also offers a couple activities. And so a couple of hostels do like cooking classes, they do walking tours, and that can be super helpful as well. But in addition to all of these internet resources, I think the most critical and crucial thing is obviously if you're traveling with a laptop or you have your passport with yourself, you want to have some sort of a way to secure your belongings. And luckily, I borrowed this lock from one of my friends, actually my neighbor. And it's just you lock your stuff up in a locker in these hostels, and it makes you feel so much better about the security of your items. And you never want to leave your things unattended. That would be like the biggest no-no in Europe. Just take a lock, something as simple as this one. It's just a small number padlock, can get the job done. And in addition to that, I also sort of had this pouch over here with me at all times. Sometimes I would put my passport in here, sometimes I just lock it up because I trusted nobody would, go through 1,000 combinations and try to break open the lock. If I did have my passport, it was my passport. It was a utility cable with USB-C and Lightning. And then I had my wallet in here. I also had sunglasses, just because sometimes it gets super sunny. And then I had a phone power bank, which was super handy, especially because sometimes you can't find places to charge your phone. And you can't just keep going to Starbucks's and just stuff like that. Like sometimes you just have to charge it with something you own. And then I had this selfie stick, which was super helpful because I could take pictures of myself when I was traveling by myself. And I do think the pictures came out great. So I think it was a great investment for traveling. And then I also had local currency, as I mentioned about. It's good to have money on hand. And you can always have that with you in a place that's super close to you. This was my pouch. I don't think there's anything else important. Although I will say I did have a couple of coins in here because certain bathroom facilities in Europe, they require you to pay to use the bathroom, which, to each their own. And so I just had coins that I was able to get from like a local like corner store, and I was just like, hey, can you break this into like coins? And they just give me coins. That is sort of like the immediates that I had on my person. I also had Tylenol. So funny enough, two of my friends and I got semi-sick. We weren't like super, super sick. We weren't like dying of a fever. Although I did take a cooking class and I did have a really, really bad runny nose. And so it's good to have Tylenol with you, and just a couple of other basic necessities. But obviously that would be something you put in your backpack. And so, when I was traveling, the items I took with me were my backpack. I loaded up at least 4 to 5 pairs of clothes. I had soap, all the toiletries and everything in here as well. And then I also took a lot of empty bags. This bag over here was a bag for my big puffy jacket. And that became super helpful for me because when I was in Italy, I didn't want to wear a jacket in like 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I was able to just like wrap my jacket up, put it in the bag, and then I was able to attach that bag either via hook or just carried it in my hand. And that became super helpful. Just take a lot of spare bags, maybe one for laundry, one for just things that you want to carry. And, you can take your laptop and stuff like that as well, but just be careful that, if you're taking your laptop, you also have the required charging and like a world charging. I actually have it right there. You have some sort of world charging cube. So this one has all of like the EU and UK style outlets and all of the inputs as well. It's super helpful to carry things like this as well. I also would recommend taking a towel just because some hostels don't give you a towel, or they do give you a towel, but then they like charge you extra for it. And it's helpful to have a towel, especially if you're at the beach or something. Just carry a towel as well. It'll be a massive source of the weight in your backpack, but it's worth it. And then another recommendation is if you ever have to store your backpacks for any reason whatsoever, a lot of hostels also have backpack storage places. And so if you arrive at say 9 a.m. and your room isn't available until 2, you can store your backpack until probably 2. I'm sure they have a lot of resources when it comes to, how long you can keep your backpack in a locker and stuff like that. And they're usually super affordable options. So you can do that as well. And last thing I would recommend is you can do laundry in a hostel. It becomes super hard because I think when you're in a hostel, you're obviously trying to travel and stuff. And so if you're in an Airbnb, which can also be an economical option, especially if you're traveling in a group, if you kind of divide the costs up, it becomes cheaper than a hostel at times. If you're traveling in an Airbnb and that Airbnb is all yours, just do the laundry in there, and don't, leave it for something you do in a hostel. Just save your dirty clothes until you go to an Airbnb, which is sort of what I took. And then the last one, which is a personal learning experience of mine, if you're taking a train, right? You're taking a train. If you can't find a machine for tickets, ask someone for where you can buy the tickets, because not all train stations have train ticket machines. And I say this because I was fined over $100 in one of the countries I was in for not having a valid ticket. So that's just super helpful to keep in mind. And then side note for the luggage that you carry, certain flights and airlines can be a bit nitpicky about the luggage that you have. In my experience, this backpack was fine as a personal item on Ryanair. But I also have a friend who took a similar sized backpack on a Ryanair flight, and that did not turn out so well. So you're sort of gambling with the luck you have and the airport that you're in and the timeline that the plane is running on, if the plane is delayed or not delayed. But more often than not, if you're on a flight and they don't say anything, then you can just put your backpack in the overhead bins. People put their jackets and stuff in there as well, so it's completely fine to just sort of abuse that. But that is my exhaustive list. Oh, one more. Also carry a water bottle around. Certain places meaning like certain hostels, have water fountains, and so just fill up your water bottle at the water fountain, and use that water, because you don't want to keep buying those water bottles, especially if you have water close to you. Other countries and other hostels in other countries did say things like, oh, you can fill up your water bottle from the tap, the kitchen tap, or like your bathroom sink. I actually ended up trusting it despite being skeptical at first, especially in countries like Denmark and Norway, where the water just was super, super clean. But yeah, it's super helpful to have a water bottle this big, and in addition to my pouch, I would walk everywhere with my water bottle. Yeah, I think that is the main gist in terms of what to take, and just those resources. But I also wanted to kind of give more advice in the context of how I traveled and where I traveled. So my first leg of the trip started in Pisa, and Pisa is, I'm sure in the summers it's a very bustling town, but I would recommend that if you're going at an off-season time, that you only spend a day, especially because the hostel options are sort of limited, and I think the only reason people come is to see the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and I feel like once you check that off, you can get excited and ready for the next adventure. And so Pisa for us was a really good way to start the trip because it was only one day, and we were sort of able to just take it in easy, just see the one and only attraction, and then take a train, which we took to Florence. And so in Florence, what we ended up doing was we did a pasta making class, we did a Vespa tour. A Vespa is sort of like a motorcycle, and it takes you on like all of the hills of the Tuscany countryside and of Tuscany in Italy, and it was just so beautiful. And it culminated at the end with a wine tasting and pasta at their estate. And obviously the tour guides and the people you meet on these excursions are super friendly and nice, and you kind of get to know more about them. So I think for more of a social experience and for more of just like the experience of getting to know a place more, I think these excursions on Get Your Guide or TripAdvisor can be super helpful as well. I would say even if you're like a student who's on a budget, I would not cheap out, and I would still recommend that you do these excursions just because they can be some of the best ways to experience a certain place. But sort of, I guess, devil's advocate to that is it's also super helpful if you research the free offerings that they have. I know Florence had a lot of free tickets for museums, like the Uffizi Gallery if you're a student.
Uffizi.
And all you had to do was just show your student ID, and you get all of these tickets for the Uffizi Gallery, the Corridor, the Boboli Gardens. I mean, the entire interconnected arts side of Florence. And then you can also do a free walking tour. I don't remember what the websites were called, but I think it was like Free Walking Guru or something. They have a lot of people who are these tour guides, and they just give walking tours for free. But obviously, a lot of these tour guides aren't given like a salary. They're just kind of by contract, and so they make a lot of their income and money by tips. And so it is always good to tip them at the end, but it can be a really cheap and economical way to explore a city. So that was sort of the bulk of Florence. I would say I really enjoyed Florence for the food. It was kind of easy, in my opinion, to find vegetarian food. I am a vegetarian. And yeah, just the load of gelato I had was wonderful, and that was just amazing. But from Florence, we took high-speed Italian rail all the way to Salerno. Salerno is a city south of Naples, and the reason we went to Salerno was because it was like a pit stop and a place to stay overnight before our next trip to the Amalfi Coast.
Wow.
And so Salerno, yeah, just it was kind of just standard. You go there, you have a guest house, and we just left the next day bright and early, and we took a ferry all the way to Amalfi, the city of Amalfi. So when it comes to the Amalfi Coast, I will say there are two major cities, Amalfi and then Positano. I think Positano is more sort of like just tourist shops and stuff. Think Beyonce, Jay-Z, Kardashians, all of them stayed in Positano. But then Amalfi is like sort of like a place where locals live, and they have more food options and less consumerist options in Amalfi. But overall, both places are really unique. Positano is just super beautiful with the views. And then we did a hike between pretty much close to Amalfi and Positano called the Path of the Gods, which was really exhausting, but it was a really rewarding hike. So a lot of nature is to be sort of explored in the Amalfi area as well. I would recommend that, you know, when you're in Amalfi Coast, you find an Airbnb, but you also find an Airbnb that has sort of a really, really good reputation. And I say this because we stayed at an Airbnb in the neighboring city of Atrani. Atrani is close to Amalfi, and we found a really economical and budget-friendly Airbnb. Although the Airbnb hosts did promise they had Wi-Fi and stuff like that, but they didn't have Wi-Fi. So obviously just sort of look at the reviews of the Airbnbs that you stay at and just do like a sanity check. I unfortunately had a meeting that I had to take, but I was unable to take it. And so I was sort of panicking for like an hour. I ran into a restaurant that I had eaten at the night before, and I was like, hey, can I use your Wi-Fi? And thankfully, he allowed me to use his Wi-Fi. And I just emailed back saying, sorry, I cannot make the meeting. Can you reschedule to next week? And yeah, just I think there's certain small things like that. We call it like the stupid tax. Just you sometimes have to pay a price for just being in remote locations and just isolated. But yeah, that was my experience in Amalfi and the Amalfi Coast. I think overall it's definitely a beautiful place, a lot of hiking, a lot of waterfalls, a lot of mountainside viewpoints, and a lot of lemon trees. And you get to see the local people and sort of like how the houses are like, and certain people's daily commutes. They're walking all the way up a mountain just to go to their like hometown. So that was just a really cool experience to kind of be a part of as well. But yeah, just I am a bit salty about the Wi-Fi situation, but it ended up working out. I was able to get my meeting rescheduled, and then it took place in Copenhagen, which was a bit later in the trip. But after Amalfi, we took a ferry that went all the way around Capri, and then it went straight to Naples. I will say Naples had a bit of a strange vibe to it, especially because Florence felt super preserved and like heritage UNESCO preserved. Naples was sort of all over the place. There were just a lot of things going on. It was a super bustling town with a lot of people. Um, and that's also just another, I guess, facet of just when you travel, you get to see how different cities look like. But I will say that there were a couple of experiences we had in Naples. One being we tried to find a train and we went to this train station that didn't exist, although Google Maps said that it did exist. So just there's a couple of things to be wary of. The other one that was really funny was we were taking the Circumvesuviana train back to Naples from Pompeii, and the trains just like stopped midway. And I'm not really sure even now how to interpret the event that took place, but essentially what ended up happening was every single person in the train was boarded onto a bus. They had 8 buses, and we all just got onto a bus that went straight to Naples. There were a lot of people who were upset, especially because they wanted to stop at the Herculean and sort of these other stops before Naples, and they were unfortunately unable to stop because the bus went straight to Naples. So that just comes back to the stupid tax. Just always be mindful that, you know, the cheapest public transit might not be the most efficient or the most trustworthy. But yeah, that was a very strange experience. But I would say Naples was perfect for a single day. The hostel we were at was probably the most insane hostel I've ever stayed at. They had bunk beds that were 3 beds, and the ceilings were gigantic. This was the hostel with 12 beds to 2 bathrooms. And my friend and I were just so lucky that we caught the bathrooms when they were available, and we just pretty much ran out of there. But other than that, if you're visiting Pompeii, you either want to stay in Pompeii, the city, or the modern city of Pompeii, not the old city. Or you can stay in Naples and you can sort of take a train into Pompeii, which it becomes budget friendly. And for Pompeii, we ended up actually we booked a guided tour with a tour guide. And I think 99% of people go into Pompeii having booked like a tour guide. And so it's just, I think it's sort of the standard that you want to go with a group, especially because you get to appreciate it more when there's a tour guide telling you more about the history than meets the eye. But that was Naples. And then from Naples, we took a bus to the Naples airport because Naples does not have a train to the airport, which was so unfortunate.
Say that you're fine.
But we took a €5 bus. I think it was called the Alley bus, and it pretty much got us there. No complaints, although a lot of infrastructural things were just surprising and caught us off guard in Naples. And then from there, it was 6 of us in Copenhagen. We stayed at a really nice hostel that had one of the best breakfasts. And in Copenhagen, we saw like the museum. We went to cafes. We had a lot of food, and it was really nice. And I think I especially like Copenhagen for the fact that because it was 6 of us, there were so many of us at a certain location that it felt so much more fun. The hostel that we stayed in was honestly like probably the best hostel in terms of the service. That I ended up actually staying for another night just to take my meeting, and they were super accommodating with the process. I think the one drawback was I was hoping they had a meeting room for me to take my meeting, but their meeting rooms were unfortunately booked out. So I just ended up staying in a private dorm with just 1 bed, and I took my meeting there. It worked out. A lot of the things that you can do in Copenhagen just involve seeing the sights, and so we did a canal boat tour. That was, I think, like €9 per person. And it was really nice. A nice way to see the entire city. You go to New Oven, you see all the pretty buildings, and yeah, you feel like you're in Scandinavia, which is really fun. And then Oslo was where I was for a couple days. It was just sort of like a place to stay before going all the way to Tromsø, which is super far up in the Arctic. And yeah, I would say Oslo was pretty standard. I mean, I think I like Norway for having so many electric cars and just walkable everything. It was just a nice place to sort of just like walk around, take pictures. But Oslo for a day was sufficient in my opinion. And the next day, we took a train back to the airport, and then we took a flight all the way to Tromsø. I think one thing that sort of stood out was Oslo, because the airport is super far from the city. you do have to take sort of like a national train service to the city of Oslo from Oslo's airport. And that can be a bit expensive, but I feel like the train is still the most cheapest way to get to the city. And thankfully, our Airbnb host for Oslo, kind of told us all the things we needed to do. He told us which train to take, which platform it would be on, and how much the price would be. So we all sort of like saw that. He had that like foresight of like what was gonna happen. So yeah, that was super helpful for Oslo. But then from Oslo to Tromsø, obviously Tromsø, because it's super far north, there barely are any hostels, so accommodation was in an Airbnb. And for us, we stayed at this Airbnb that had sort of like a cabin feel, which is really nice. It was actually on someone's property and they lived upstairs, but it appeared like their garage had been turned into like an Airbnb, but it was decently big enough for 3 people. And our Airbnb host also gave us air mattresses, and so we felt like we had enough room and space, and we also had a kitchen, which was helpful. And we had laundry. So all of the clothes from Copenhagen and Oslo were laundried or washed, I guess, in Tromsø. For Tromsø, I would say it is like a place that you want to experience everything in. You want to take the Northern Lights bus, you want to do the fjord cruise, you want to do the skiing. There's so many activities, and it's so worth it. I feel like there will never be a time in my life where I'll see fjords so pretty, just mountain landscapes covered and just blanketed in fresh snow. And yeah, I remember we also went petting and feeding reindeer and reindeer sledding. And then one of the days really didn't know what to do, so we took the local bus to this cafe that was really pretty, and the cafe was at the mouth of a fjord. And so just the mountain views from the fjord were just so beautiful and stunning. And we walked around, we did a bit of hiking, and my most favorite nature pictures are actually from that day trip that we took to a cafe, just because of the nature that was surrounding the cafe. But yeah, Tromsø, I would say the Airbnbs can be in more residential areas. And so be prepared to take a bus or walk for 40 minutes into the city of Tromsø if you want to go spend time in the city. But Tromsø does have a lot of resources, so many grocery stores. They have a McDonald's, they have Burger Kings. I think they have 2 Burger Kings. And the bus system is super well documented. Like, you could go on Apple Maps or Google Maps and just look at the live real time of like the buses and stuff, and like it's super helpful. They tell you how crowded it is. Although one thing I found sort of inconsistent in Tromsø was we would pay for the tickets at the very beginning, but it seemed like the locals just did not care about paying for the bus tickets, and the locals would just get on the bus. And so although we were buying the tickets, it was a bit of a shock to see just the complacency to buying a ticket or just scanning their transit card. That was also just a bit interesting, but just out of necessity we bought the tickets because
we bought tickets.
But yeah, there were a lot of really standard reliable bus lines. I remember taking the 26 bus and the 24 bus, and they were the bus between the airport and the Tromsø city, and they just so happened to sort of pass through our Airbnb. And so we would take the 26 or 24 bus into the neighborhood our Airbnb was in, and that was super helpful. It would save us at least 30 minutes of walking. But a lot of Tromsø is hilly, so the last 10 minutes that we would walk just to get into the Airbnb, it was a steep incline. But other than that, I think Tromsø was great. The infrastructure was beautiful for being at so far up north. And the activities, I think we were super lucky to have gotten to be able to see the Northern Lights, because the day before was cloudy, and the 2 days after we saw the Northern Lights were also cloudy. And so a lot of it is weather dependent. And I remember meeting this other woman on our tour she had gone on 2 previous Northern Light tours, and she was on her 3rd one. But thankfully to the operating company, they allowed people to go as many times as they wanted, just because they wanted to ensure that people were seeing the Northern Lights. So that was super helpful for her. But I think luck does play a big sort of role in terms of the activities you do and the types of things you're able to see. But other than that, Tromsø was beautiful. And then from Tromsø, we went straight to Oslo. And then from Oslo, we went all the way back to Heathrow. And yeah, I'm back and I'm sharing my experiences. Overall, I do think that backpacking and at times even solo traveling is super worth it. I feel like you get to learn more about a place that you otherwise wouldn't have like been to or traveled in. And I think this is just another way of me saying that I highly recommend that if you're not studying abroad or if you haven't considered it, you do consider studying abroad. I think it's such a formative experience on how you perceive the world and just the things that you're able to say when you sort of grow up and the stories that you're able to tell. It builds character, and it's a nice way to challenge yourself and sort of be in unfamiliar environments while trying out new things. But yeah, other than that,